Imagine a place where the memory of gold was so powerful it could build a town from nothing. A place where the hope for a better life was so intoxicating it could make men endure the most brutal conditions on Earth. But then, imagine if that same place and the memory of it became so terrible that the human mind, in a collective act of self-preservation, simply chose to forget. This is not a story of a ghost town. This is the story of a town that became a ghost in the minds of the men and women who built it. Welcome to Keno City, 1898. Welcome to the town that erased itself from memory. Our story begins not with a whisper, but with a roar, the Klondike Gold Rush. By 1898, the easy pickings along the creeks near Dawson City were gone, staked by thousands. But the dream of gold is a fever, and it drives men to look beyond the horizon, into the harshest, most unforgiving landscapes. One of those men was a prospector named John One-Eyed Keno, a man as tough as the land he explored. Pushing further into the Ogilvie Mountains, into a region of jagged peaks and deep, silent valleys, he found it. Not a rich stream, but the mother lode itself, a vein of silver-rich galena so pure it gleamed like a malicious smile in the rock. He staked his claim, and the word, as it always does, spread like wildfire. But this was a different kind of fire. It didn't attract the hopeful masses of the Klondike. It drew a different breed, a harder, more desperate, more solitary kind of man. To get to Keno City, you didn't just travel, you endured. You battled the choking dust of summer, the swarms of black flies that could drive a man to madness, and the winter that descended with a fury that seemed almost personal. Temperatures would plummet to 60 below, and the darkness, the winter darkness, was absolute, a physical weight that pressed down on the soul. The town that grew was a ramshackle collection of log cabins and canvas tents, clinging to the side of the mountain like lichen on a stone. There was no law here, no church, no women or children in the early days. It was a world of men, their faces weathered into leather masks, their eyes perpetually scanning the ground for the next glittering sign. And for a while, the mountain gave up its treasure. Claims were staked, mines were sunk deep into the permafrost, and rough silver bricks began to stack up in the company shacks. Men like Lars Hennig, a silent Swede who owned the Lucky Strike claim, and Dublin Mike O'Rourke, whose laugh could fill a saloon, became local legends. They built a life of sorts. A saloon called the Silver Slipper opened, its windows fogged with the heat of bodies and the smell of raw whiskey. The sound of an out-of-tune piano fought against the wind. For a brief moment, in the perpetual struggle for survival, there was a semblance of community. They were bound together not just by greed, but by the shared understanding of the immense, silent power of the land that surrounded them. A land that never felt truly conquered, only temporarily tolerated. The first sign was subtle. It was the winter of '99. A winter so brutal it felt like the mountain itself was trying to expel them. Miners, usually solitary figures, began to report a strange feeling of being watched in the deep tunnels, a sensation so acute they would turn, pickaxe raised, to find only the damp, dark rock. Then came the sounds, faint, echoing whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, just on the edge of hearing. At first it was dismissed as the wind whistling through fissures or the tinnitus born of constant drilling. But the stories persisted. A man named Abner Hayes swore he saw a figure standing at the end of his tunnel, a man shaped from shadow and shifting rock dust. When he advanced, the figure was gone, leaving only the scent of ozone and cold stone. Then the hallucinations began. They didn't happen to everyone, and never in a group. They were intensely personal, private horrors. One miner, shoveling ore, suddenly found himself standing in a sun-drenched wheat field in Iowa, the smell of his mother's pie thick in the air. He dropped to his knees, weeping, only for the vision to vanish, leaving him kneeling in the frozen muck of his claim.
Another, Mike O'Rourke himself, was in the Silver Slipper when he suddenly couldn't recognize the faces of his friends. They were strangers, their features shifting and melting like wax. He stumbled out into the snow, screaming that he didn't know who he was. These weren't drunken visions, they were vivid, terrifying breaks with reality, and they were becoming more frequent.
The event that broke the town's spirit was the disappearance of the Larson brothers. They were working a claim high on the ridge, two quiet Finns who kept to themselves. When they failed to show up for supplies for over a week, a group of men went to check on them. They found the cabin door unlocked. Inside, the stove was cold. 2 bowls of half-eaten stew sat on the table, frozen solid. Their mining tools were neatly stacked by the door, but the brothers were gone. A search party scoured the area for days, but they found no tracks leading away from the cabin in the fresh snow. It was as if the 2 men had simply been plucked from existence. The official report would later list them as missing, presumed dead. But in the hushed tones of the saloon that night, another theory took hold. The mountain hadn't taken their bodies, it had taken them back. Panic, cold and insidious, began to replace the fever for gold. The hallucinations spread. Men would wake up in their bunks unable to recall their own names. They would stare at their own hands, their own reflections in a bucket of water, with no sense of ownership. It was a mass creeping amnesia, a disillusion of the self. The very memories that made them who they were, their past lives, their loves, their reasons for coming here, were being scoured away by some unseen force. The community they had built shattered. Trust evaporated. How could you trust a man who might not remember you, or even himself, from one moment to the next? The social contract, already thin in this raw frontier, dissolved completely.
The final exodus was not a coordinated flight, but a frantic, individual scattering. It was triggered by what happened to Lars Hennig. He was found sitting on a stump outside his mine, the Lucky Strike, now silent. He was perfectly calm, but his eyes were empty. When a concerned miner approached him, Lars looked up and asked in a voice devoid of all emotion, "What is this place? Who are you?" He had no memory of his name, his claim, or the fortune in silver buried in the mountain behind him. He was a blank slate. That was the final proof. The mountain wasn't just claiming their lives, it was claiming their very identities. Within a week, Keno City was empty. Men abandoned their claims, their tools, their hard-won silver, leaving everything exactly as it was. They fled, not from the cold or the hardship, but from the terrifying void where their memories used to be. The trail out of the Ogilvie Mountains that season was not a path of hopeful prospectors, but a ragged line of broken men. They didn't speak of what had happened. There were no tall tales, no boasts of narrow escapes. They walked with their heads down, their eyes fixed on the path ahead, as if afraid to look back for fear that the very act of remembering the place would summon the emptiness once more. They arrived in Dawson City not as conquering miners, but as refugees from a silent war. Their pockets sometimes heavy with raw silver, but their souls frighteningly light.
In Dawson, the saloons were loud and bright, filled with the cacophony of 1,000 untouched memories. But the men from Keno sat in the corners, nursing their drinks, their silence a stark contrast to the boisterous energy around them. When asked about their strike, about the fabled silver veins of Keno City, they would simply shake their heads. Their faces would go blank, a shudder falling behind their eyes. "Don't recall," they'd mumble. "Nothing up there but rock and cold." It was a lie, but it was a lie their minds had insisted upon. a protective barrier against a truth too terrible to hold. The authorities took notice. A mounted policeman, Sergeant Malcolm Fletcher, a man built on facts and procedure, was dispatched to investigate the abandoned settlement. His report, filed in the spring of 1900, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic confusion. He found a town frozen in time, a pot still simmering on a cold stove in the Silver Slipper. Ledgers lay open on desks, the ink faded, but the entries clear, detailing thousands of dollars in silver shipments. Personal effects, photographs of loved ones, letters from home, a child's carved toy that must have belonged to one of the later arrivals, were left in cabins as if their owners had just stepped out for a moment.
But it was the lack of chaos that was most disturbing. There were no signs of a struggle, no violence, no pestilence. It was an orderly evacuation of one's own mind. Fletcher interviewed the few former residents he could track down.
He found Lars Hennig working as a dishwasher in a Skagway hotel, a man with no past. When shown a deed to the Lucky Strike claim with his own name on it, he stared at it with genuine bewilderment. "Must be another fella," he said softly. "Same name. I've never been a miner." Dublin Mike O'Rourke was found in a Seattle flophouse, a shadow of the man he once was. He could remember his childhood in Ireland, the boat to New York, but the years between 1898 and 1899 were a complete and total blank. He described it as a hole in my life. Fletcher's final report concluded that a shared psychological malady, likely induced by extreme isolation, malnutrition, and the peculiar atmospheric conditions of the high altitude, was the cause. It was a neat, logical explanation he could put in a file. But in his personal diary, an entry dated June 15, 1900, reveals his true feelings. He wrote, "I've investigated murders, stampedes, and claims of witchcraft, but I've never felt a dread like the one in that empty town. It is not what is there, it is what is missing. It is as if the soul of the place has been scooped out, and it has taken the memories of every man who lived there with it. I stayed 2 nights, and upon waking this morning for a few terrifying seconds, I could not recall my wife's face."
What could have caused such a thing? Modern theories abound. Some point to ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on damp grains and can cause convulsions and hallucinations, the same culprit behind the Salem witch trials. Perhaps a shipment of tainted flour made its way to the isolated community. Others suggest a slow leak of carbon monoxide or other natural gases from the mines, an invisible poison that slowly asphyxiated not their bodies but their cognitive functions, targeting the hippocampus, the very seat of memory. But the local Han First Nation people, who had long avoided that specific mountain ridge, have a different explanation. Their elders called the area Yendata, which translates roughly to the place where spirits drink. They believed that the mountain was home to ancient, non-human entities that did not feed on flesh or blood, but on the essence of experience, on memory itself. To them, the prospectors were not cursed or punished. They were simply a feast. The miners, with their intense greed, their powerful hopes, and their bitter regrets, had provided a rich and concentrated source of sustenance for these primordial beings. The hallucinations were not a symptom of poisoning, but the feeling of one's very life being siphoned away, the flickering of a candle flame as it is consumed.
The legacy of Keno City is a haunting one. The town was eventually repopulated by a new wave of miners in the 1910s, men who knew the stories but dismissed them as superstition. They mined the silver for decades, and the modern-day hamlet of Keno City still exists. But the original town site, the one from the rush of '98, is still there too, just a little ways up the hill. The logs of the old cabins are slumped and gray, returning to the earth. If you walk there today, amidst the whispering aspens and the constant wind, you might feel it.
a profound and unsettling silence. It's the sound of a place that knows how to forget and knows how to make others forget. It's the sound of a memory not just fading, but being actively erased.